with me. She's one of our senior leaders, oversees third-year school of ministry, teaches in our school of ministry, and she is one of our best and brightest leaders. Welcome.
So good to be with you.
To our little podcast we got going on here.
Yeah, so fun.
This is Women's Month, so we are highlighting, this is Women's History Month, I think it's called. And so we've been highlighting women, and I wrote a book on empowering women called Fashion to Reign. You should check that out, by the way, Fashion to Reign. I think you'll like that book. But we wanted to just, all this month, just actually talk about the subject of women and empowering women, and what does it look like for women to be in leadership. What does it look like for women to actually be in leadership and in a way still lead their home? And so, Hayley, you're married?
Yes.
For how many years?
Nearly 14.
14, and you have three children.
Kids, yeah.
Yeah. And how old's your youngest?
3 years old.
3 years old. And you work full time here too.
I do. I work
and so
full-time.
why don't you just talk through that for just a minute, just the practical parts of how does that work out, and how do your kids get you, and how does your husband deal with you? Working full time, all the things that are probably stimulated some people's minds.
Yeah, well, firstly, I never thought I would live this kind of life. When I had my first baby, I went to part-time work. My husband was working full time, carried kind of the more typical gender roles.
Yeah.
And so it was actually a season that the Lord started speaking to my husband and I about switching what we were doing. He's in film, and so his ability to work remotely is way bigger than mine. And I had a lot of pressure on me in the ministry environment. It's been a journey for me, honestly. I think it's been a big journey of undoing and learning how to follow the Lord in obedience instead of what I perceived I should be.
Yeah.
And I had to kind of find a way, together with my husband, to kind of break down what we thought should be and actually find out where we come alive, what we're created for. And I don't view motherhood as balancing ministry and motherhood. I'm not trying to balance. You don't balance things that are unequal in value. My family's value is different to my job. But I do try my best to be obedient to where the Lord has me. And so if he's saying tonight's home and not at an event, then that's where the grace is. And if he says, oh no, tonight is at this service, then I know that there'll be grace for my family. And there's days where we checking in. There's weeks where we're checking in daily. And there's weeks that go by where there's no need to check in. And I think we've just learned to have a really honest and authentic relationship as we serve the Lord and serve one another.
Yeah, so you guys, you took away the word balance, so I was just going to use the word balance. But for whatever the right word is to say, you found a rhythm in working together to shepherd the kids. Basically, what you're saying.
I don't think you can measure anything in the human life daily. Like when your kid's wanting to grow and wants to measure you, like wants to be measured on the wall every day.
Yeah.
You don't actually see really the discrepancy. And so I think what's really important is you measure yourself in seasons.
Yeah.
And so and you're checking in, and I think we're learning to go. There's rhythms where there's 2 weeks where that rhythm is really high intensity, but then I follow those next 2 weeks with space and capacity. So we've learned to follow seasons, and in seasons, sometimes you have a busy 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'll look ahead in my schedule to make sure that, I don't measure how we're doing in those busy 2 weeks. I move through those. We have a covenant together. And so we covenant through, and on the back end of that, we make a lot of space of reflection, a lot of space for downtime, and to make sure that we are flowing together in a way that feels healthy and sustainable. I don't think anyone burns out from a hard 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You burn out from not assessing hard seasons and adjusting in the future. And so, like for instance, there was a season where there was grace for me to do Sunday nights. I started noticing my children were needing mom more in the evenings.
Yeah.
So I spoke to my leaders and I said, I feel like my family needs to shift. And we're able to do that and make adjustments to the needs of my family. And then the other thing I'll just say is, if you fear something, you're not going to do well managing it. And so I have to really make sure that I'm not living in fear around something, but I'm living by faith.
Yeah.
And I think, when you live in fear, you'll live in guilt, because you can never, ever be everything that you could be if you only had one thing to do.
Totally. I remember hearing this story about this guy's in the bathroom and he's changing his daughter in the men's bathroom and someone walks up and goes, "Ah, you got babysitting duty, right?" He goes, "Nah, I'm a dad."
Yeah.
And so sometimes we kind of have the stereotype like, "Oh, you're doing woman's work, like you're helping your wife." It's like, "No, I'm being a dad."
100%.
So, I think that the idea that a woman plays the most important role and therefore she should be present, 100% of the time, and that the dad, the father, is like he plays a lesser role in the life of the family is not true. And so one of the things I think that you guys are, you and Ryan are practicing is that he's as engaged with your family as you are. Like you're not less engaged than him, but he's probably more engaged than, well, let's say, the average father.
Yeah, I would say, like, a lot of people, they look at kind of the stereotypical roles where a man goes to work and when he comes home, he's tired. And so the wife's cooked and he's, putting his feet up and taking time to decompress. That picture, I'm not saying all men do that. Sometimes there's that picture, the 1950s housewife kind of picture. When I stepped into full-time ministry, I didn't step into that picture. I didn't step into now I'm working, and so therefore when I get home, no, I get home and I'm cooking and I'm sitting on the couch watching the movie that my 3-year-old wants to watch while he has his milk.
Super exciting, right?
Yeah, it's very full on, but it's such a gift. And I would say my parents followed very kind of stereotypical South African men and women roles. And my dad would say on this end, he realizes that he was probably robbed a little bit from certain connection with his kids that my husband is getting. And you know what, no matter how long Ryan's home, he doesn't become a woman. Yeah. It's this, I think I had this thought that a man would be emasculated. Yeah. And he still has the same drive, the same need to conquer, the same need to take on mountains and protect his family. We're just finding that men are actually quite well created to be a part of their children's lives and to be fathers.
That's really good. I love it. Okay, so you teach class on, it's called Wholehearted Women. Actually, I didn't know what it was until I looked at the notes here, so notes are good. And what's the premise for the class, and why do you think it's important to teach in this ministry setting?
What's interesting was Gabe Valenzuela, who was my boss at the time in second year. I was helping oversee second year underneath him. He came to me with a problem. He was like, every year we have nominations for this award called the Emil Johnson Award.
Yes, we do.
We have 60-something% women in class, about 63. So that's about 37% men. But every year, more men are nominated than women. And he goes, that's a problem for me, and I need you to solve it. And I thought, well, how am I going to solve that? This is like a systemic issue that's been going on for how many centuries? But anyway, what I did was, my response was to create a class. The problem was, as I started creating this class, I realized how much I had unidentified within myself with feminine attributes because...
Unidentified.
Yeah, it almost like disconnected a little bit.
Kind of lost some of them.
Yeah, so I was feminine.
In leadership.
But in leadership, I think I'd kind of moved away. You hear, you run like a girl, you throw like a girl, you're being such a girl, and none of that felt encouraging.
It's not a compliment.
So there was parts of me that I had to start wrestling with, where did femininity lose its power? Like in my mind and in the church, and where, and obviously it starts all the way in the beginning in the garden where competition enters in through sin. Yeah. But anyway, this class was such a powerful tool for me personally to start wrestling through the beauty of femininity, the beauty of women in ministry, and the beauty of this shoulder-to-shoulder relationship that men and women are created to have. Yeah. And so the class is really there. It's kind of got theological basis and then personal discovery basis on what does it look like not to step into a leadership role in men's shoes, but what does it look like as women to step into that, and what are some of the things women face? I mean, and there's so many things we could go into, but emotionally women face a different level of weight in ministry, multitasking, things like that. And so we open those things up, and instead of making them look weak, we go, how are those things strengths that become added to environments that create a healthy picture of what a family looks like?
Part of the challenge, and you and I have had this conversation before, and it's part of what I think that inspires the class too, is that the challenge is that God is male and female, right? Because he made Adam both male and female in his image. So it wasn't like Adam male was made in his image and Adam female was not. And yet we know that women are equally powerful but distinctly different. They're equally powerful but they're distinctly different. And so the challenge in all environments is that when men have been leading, as you point out, for centuries, and they create the test for leadership, like what's a leader and how does a leader behave, and then they give those tests to women, and it's like women rarely, I won't say never, but they rarely score as high as men because men wrote the test for men, by men, and then men train women. So the challenge, and this is the way it's been because women are coming in, can I say, in my opinion, very late into leadership because they've been restricted for so many centuries. So all of a sudden you have men training women, but they don't know any better but to train as men. So you're training women as women. You're training men and women, let's be clear. But how do women lead differently?
Yeah. It's interesting, the word, when God says, I'm going to make a helper, he uses that word, Eza Kenegdu. Eza is the word helper, but it's used 21 times in the Bible. Twice it's used for women, and then it's 16 times of those times it's used for God.
Yeah.
And it's used for God as an ally to Israel in war.
Yep.
Other 2 times it's used as a country that comes as an ally in war to Israel. And we use that word as like helper, like a
servant.
Yes, like a doormat.
Yes, slave.
But it's actually in a warlike. It's a warlike declaration, and as a kenegdu is in complement to.
Yeah.
And
or opposite of.
Yes, or opposite. So the other part. So there's a part, and this is the other part. It's the other side of the coin, and together they make a whole picture. And a lot of the ancient Hebrew writers, that they say that the reason why Adam needed a suitable helper was because there was an enemy in the garden. So the Lord...
Ooh, never heard that before.
Yeah, so the thought was there's enemy in the garden, and Adam doesn't need just a helper in an animal, like a partnership that just is comforting him, but actually a helper that will come against the enemy with him. And we know that Eve actually fails in that. And Adam in his passivity, they don't.
They both fail.
But the restoration that Jesus brought is that a woman would come in complement to, in her difference, and not come against him, but actually would help him in the battle against the enemy to overcome and to establish the kingdom and the throne of God here on earth. Oof. And so
I wrote the book and I didn't know that. It's very good.
It's really like, it's a powerful thought. It changes your way of thinking about women's differences. And you know, men, when they have a problem, usually, and this is not all, you know, it's kind of 2 concentric circles. Men and women, they cross over. There is definite sameness, but there's also difference. But like men, often they'll go to solving their problem on their own, and then they'll come to a team. Women come to a group of people to solve their problems. We're much more relationally connected. They just say estrogen alone causes a woman to multitask so much more frequently. A woman puts her head on her pillow, and her mind will start racing just because of estrogen in her body, causing her to think through all the details in preparation to take care of her people. And so I think it's this understanding that we're not against each other, but our differences are complementary to overthrow an enemy. That together, the way we see, and when we look at the same problem together, we come up with a strategy that is more well-rounded, that actually, I think, tricks the enemy, because it's too multifaceted for him to actually enter into the understanding that the Lord created for men and women to carry together in the Spirit.
That's profound. Practically, how do you and your husband come to decisions? So it's a little bit of change of subject, but you know, because we're talking about leadership in ministry, now we're talking about leadership in home. Is it like your husband has the final say?
Yes.
Is it you have final say? Like it's actually a really practical question that, you know, that husbands and wives, they kind of live with every day. Sometimes they really don't talk about it. They just kind of try to figure out how to work it out.
Yeah.
How do you guys work it out?
It's so interesting because when you talk about the complementary and egalitarian sides of things, this question is on the edge of, it's like in the middle, but it veers just a little bit on that complementarian side. It's one of the big questions I think the church is asking right now. We don't have you're the final decision maker because you're a man. We function probably more in that Ephesians 5 passage where you kind of pull out all the subheadings and you look at the whole passage together, which is our goal is to mutually submit to one another, and to find out who is got wisdom for this, who has the gifting for this, and then choosing to prefer one another. I think when you're fighting for your voice, it's very hard to find the voice of the Lord. But I have a husband who adores me, who treats me like a treasure in his life, who values my intellect and values my wisdom. But likewise, I adore my husband. And he is a very wise and smart man. He's not as articulate in arguments as I am. Early on in our marriage, the Lord said that you could win every argument, but you will lose the heart of your husband. And I learned quickly to listen, to go slow. I used to count in my head early in our marriage because he takes some time to respond, and I'm like an auctioneer. And so...
That's a great example.
And so...
let me just say something just while I'm thinking about it, and you keep your thought,
yes,
though.
Yeah.
I love this because just because you're a better debater doesn't make you right. It makes you a better debater. And I know, like with my senior leader, he is a slow processor and he takes things deep. And then the next day he'll come with the answer, right? And doesn't make very many mistakes. And so so debating isn't his strongest suit, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't have a better idea.
100%.
To your point, right?
100%. I think you have to have humility. Marriage is one of the most humbling, marriage and then having kids, I think, is another level. But the most humbling experiences, because you realize I could be right every time, right? Like
win the argument.
Or the strongest, or I could get the result I want because of the gift of communication that God gave me. But if the result I want is to win, then I'm not going to have connection.
Yeah.
And a marriage without connection is a really horrible marriage to have.
Totally.
It's very lonely. It's lonely, I think, than actually being on your own, is having someone around that you feel completely disconnected from. And so our goal is connection, and our goal is to move together, and our goal is to serve one another in love. And so the Lord has really worked in my heart to humble myself, to find deep respect for the way my husband is wired. And he is a very smart man. But if I just did the talking, I would have never found that out.
So I guess I'm answering the question for you in that you don't have a husband makes the final decision. We talk through it and we come to a conclusion. And if we come to an impasse, maybe the person that has the most influence in that area makes the decision, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Would you kind of say it like that?
Yeah, probably bring in wise counsel.
Yeah, if it's really super important.
Bring in, but ultimately, I just there's been many moments where I'm like, what is the cost of this? I'm gonna let Ryan make that call.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with my husband. My husband has got my best interest at heart, and he's a humble man, so he'll own if he makes a mistake, and I know that we'll end up learning. And so I think we have that approach to one another. We don't have this, you're the final decision maker. We work it out together in the moment. And maybe we haven't had a big enough decision, I don't know, in 14 years to have to really duke that out.
Well, Kathy and I have been together 49 plus 5, so what's that, 54? And, we've had some really big decisions where we came to an impasse, and I'd say, and definitely my personality is much stronger. We have the same kind of issue where I'm the stronger debater, but in lots of ways, she's the wiser person who makes very few mistakes. So, I'm often the one saying, we should probably, even though I don't see it your way, your history is better than mine in this area.
Yeah, it's very good.
Your history's better. Like you have a history of making really good decisions in this area, and my history isn't as good as your history. You should probably make the final decision here,
I think that's beautiful. I think, in the kind of very strong view that the church has had on men make the final decision, I think it's interesting in my dynamic because I recognize where my strength is. I usually am the one that's trying to pull back, not because I'm a woman, but because I just recognize this is what I could do. I could kind of run over in this place. And so it's not my femininity, it's actually, and you're talking, your design. So you lean back in that place. And I think that's very important in marriages, that we understand how each other are designed and we make room for the design of the person in our life to flourish and come alive. Yeah.
I realized that I also don't give up very easy. So, again, it kind of comes back to that. Kathy will get done talking about it. Like she'll be like, like she said everything she wants to say, and she doesn't need to like talk about it again. Like it's not gonna, it isn't going to. She's not an external processor, so talking longer isn't going to bring her to a different decision. And she will have said it, and I realized after many years actually that we did what I wanted to do because she went silent, and I sort of thought her silence was, oh well, you're right, I'm wrong. But I realized later her silence is, your personality's a lot more extroverted and stronger than mine, and I don't want to fight with you.
Yeah.
So then I realized that I'm losing the benefit of the other side of the wisdom of God because I basically wore her out, right? I wore her out.
100%.
And she's like, she's the personality quite different than yours in that she's like way laid back, and she's like, it isn't worth the fight to me.
Yeah.
And unless it is, right? And
Yeah.
on the really big things, then she's like, she's going to give up. So I think it's like what you're describing is what you open with. Like, we are mutually submitted.
Yes.
We have a high value for one another, and we honor one another, and we love each other. Well, this subject is just getting started. I need to have you on another week or two so we can dive into some of the, like, what Paul said about the restrictions on women.
I'd love to.
And how are you viewing that? Because I'll say this, that in maybe a little preview for next week, is that women are the greatest oppressors of women in religious cultures, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying men don't oppress, because there's absolutely true. But when in the empowering conferences that we do around women, it's almost exclusively women that come up and say, I just really feel like this isn't a good teaching. Like, I feel like women shouldn't be teaching. I'm like, you're a woman.
It's just as we close, my mom once shared a story with me. My dad was a local preacher in our Methodist church, and they started empowering a woman in the environment to preach. And she said she used to sit in the pews, and she used to just criticize in her head, until one day she realized it was because she longed to be a preacher, but she had realized she could never do it in the current structure. And so instead of embracing this woman just brought out the discomfort that was within her of, I desire this, but I can never have it. And so she found it easier to disconnect from that woman than she did to embrace it, because she would have to confront something. And you see that in the story with Mary and Martha. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet being taught by the rabbi in a man's position. And it's not the other disciples that come to Mary and say, your job is in the kitchen.
Yeah.
It's actually Martha that does.
Exactly.
It's Martha that's trying to pull Mary back into the position that a woman should take. And I see that happen often. I think we as women have to kind of kill the competition that we have, because we have this belief system that there's only a certain amount of spots, and it's only a certain kind of women that can lead. And I think I'm seeing in this environment, there are many different kind of women that can lead. There's quiet ones, there's loud ones, there's full of energy ones, there's more subdued ones, and all of them carry a beautiful picture of the feminine desire for the Lord to see revealed on the earth.
Whew. That's powerful. Okay, I feel another session coming for sure. Well, hey, I hope you have a really great week. We just want to bless you, want to pray for your household to prosper, that your houses would be full of joy. They'd be houses of laughter and fun, and the joy of the Lord would be your strength this week. God bless you. See you next week.